Great. Welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We're going to continue our work on both flood recovery and teeing up our housing work. And today we are delighted to welcome back to this committee Charlie and Catherine. It's great to have you. And they are going to be presenting the regional planning report, the overview of that, that the Home Act triggered, what would you say? Put in place, or what? What did we do?
Required.
Required. It was a piece of our Home Act, our S-100 last year. So welcome. It's wonderful to have you. And thank you for this work. Take it away.
All right. Thank you very much for having us. For the record, I'm Catherine Dimitruk from Northwest Regional Planning Commission.
And Charlie Baker from Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, but we're really both here on behalf of our state association, the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, for the RPCs.
So as you noted, this report that we're here to talk about today was a requirement of the Home Act last year, and we submitted the report in mid-December as required by the Act. But I wanted to just take a minute to step back and put this report in context before Charlie delves into some of the details of the report. As you know, in addition to this report that we worked on, Regional Planning Commission's also worked on a report about potential Act 250 delegation to municipalities. And both of those were done within the overall context of the Natural Resources Board doing their necessary updates to Act 250 report and the designation study to look at the reform of Vermont's designation programs. We coordinated really closely with the Natural Resources Board, with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development as we were developing our report to make sure they all fit together and complemented each other. Overall, taken together, the reports are really, the recommendations of the reports are really trying to get at ensuring Vermont's goals are met with our vibrant villages and downtowns, our working landscape, our open countryside, and our conserved important natural areas. And taken together, those three reports really are working to try to further that goal, as well as address the imperative that we all know that we have for ensuring we can build more housing in the places that we need it. So the regional planning report is really the foundation of it, because through the mapping that we would do with consistency across the state, we would make sure that it serves as the foundation to guide both the designation changes and the potential Act 250 changes, as well as really serve as a vehicle to help define and prioritize state infrastructure investment to those areas where it's most needed, and in a consistent way that really supports our goal of our vibrant downtowns and villages with our working landscape and conserved natural areas. With that as the overview, I'll turn it over to Charlie to start talking a little bit about the report itself.
And so I'm going to probably apologize a couple times because this presentation really is a summary of the report. So if you don't have time to read the report, you can just pull this back up and get a good sense of what's in there.
I didn't see it on our web page under reports, but because only like 2022 or 2023 reports are on there. So I don't know if we could put all the reports up on under reports. That would be great, and then we can all consistently go to where all the reports are.
Yeah, and that was the second PDF I sent you last night. So if you
attached
it, then it's also there.
That'd be terrific.
Yeah, so the presentation is very much like an executive summary of the report, so don't worry, we're not going to read all the words.
Great.
Yeah.
And you sent us the report about a month ago.
That's right.
So is that still the report?
Yes.
Okay, because I do have that one.
It has not changed.
Okay.
That's as far as we got by
Okay.
December 15th.
Okay.
That's
a lot
okay.
of
You
work
did
in a
rock and work.
small amount of time, really.
And sorry, I'm kind of joking. Sorry, trying to get this PDF to cooperate a little easier. There we go. We'll use my finger. Okay, just real quick, I'm going to focus mostly on these yellow highlighted areas. If you read the report, there's a little bit more background and the actual legislative charge, but I'm going to focus on kind of what we thought were kind of the goals of what we're trying to accomplish more broadly. 4 and 5 are kind of like digging in a little bit more to like kind of the work we did with all the RPCs, you know, kind of what was consistent, what was different between our regional plans, and the process we went through. So we'll really spend most of our time on the recommendations. And those are broken into 5 areas. So thank you for that charge in this study. But you know, how to make the mapping and the policies in our regional plans more consistent. You know, they're broadly consistent, but they're not the same, right? And then how are regional plans reviewed? Right now, obviously, they're reviewed by our municipalities. And then how do they integrate with other state policy initiatives? And that's where we talk about how it relates to the Act 250 ideas, the designation ideas, but also just broadly state investment in municipalities. And then equitable engagement was one of the asks. And then kind of just some initial ideas about the implementation timeline, which we're probably quite aggressive on, but we thought we'd start there. So just, I know you folks have seen this 100 times, but you know, there's 11 RPCs. We have about 125 staff. So I don't know, I always think you should think about us as another state agency, really, that is, you know, has offices around the state to do the work. And there's a long list of what we work on. So planning, technical assistance, project management, and there's land use, there's regional planning, Act 250, housing, climate, transportation, water quality. I'm not going to read all those, but you have a broad sense of, it's a wide variety of things having to do with the places in Vermont. So then, just so you get a sense of the process we went through, we did actually spend time with every regional plan and kind of looked at what was similar, what was different, and worked with the directors and staff, and had some board level reviews. So the directors were taking it back to our boards to kind of like, does this feel right? How does it sound? Any issues? And we were trying to get to consistent land use categories. And then also, and just what I just told you about the recommendations for how it integrates with other policy initiatives, the specific organizations that we sent it out to review included our boards and municipalities, transportation, natural resources, commerce, public service, all the place-based state agencies. So and we probably got comments from about half of them. So I'm not going to say they all really reviewed it and digested it.
Oddly, that was going to be one of my questions, Charlie. Did you actually get everyone to read it?
Yeah, I think we definitely got comments from transportation, resources, commerce, a little bit,
Regional Development Corporation.
NRB, yep, VLCT, so Vermont Planners. So, and VNRC definitely has been plugged in along the way here. Not that they necessarily agree with every detail, but, and we submitted the report. So we should probably spend a few minutes on this, because this is, you know, we kind of view the reason the legislature created us is to help to guide the development of the state. And we really focus a lot on this first state planning goal, which is the historic settlement pattern, compact villages and urban centers separated by rural countryside. And that's in statute. That's kind of our North Star that we're working about on all the time. And really all these recommendations, I think in all the reports, are trying to implement that goal. But there are other things. The second bullet is clarity about the planned scale of development. You know, one of the things I think that when we see struggles over permitting, is about expectations, right? People move somewhere and they expect it's going to stay the same. So one of the things that we hope comes out of this process is the ability to actually manage expectations better in our communities and with our residents of like, oh no, you're in a growth area. You should expect there's going to be some change there. Or you're in a natural resource area. You should expect that to stay a resource area, right? So that's what that second bullet means. We have the housing targets that were included in S100. So we were thinking like, you know, if we have
May I just ask a question on bullet 2?
Sure.
And given that Peter is sitting right behind you, I'm just curious, the realtors, people who purchase, ought to be clear on all those things.
Exactly. That's right.
So were the realtors at the table on some of this?
No, they have not been, but I will say
They are now.
You hear that?
But Peter and I talk whenever we see each
We
other.
have spoken, so.
Yeah, no, just,
And most of what we're talking about is not really inconsistent with what's already in our plans. It's more about how well is it all integrated with state policy and investment to implement. So sorry, the housing targets, the Department of Housing and Community Development is going to provide those to us this spring. So, but we know that's going to be, more than zero, right? And there needs to be some place in our communities for those housing units to be planned for, and not just scattershot. We want to be thoughtful. That's our jobs. And this is all mostly about trying to address the policy, the regulatory framework. How do we encourage or discourage development in the right and wrong places? And so when we think about it, like this is another way to encourage housing in the right places without public funding, right? We're trying to unlock the private sector here to do some work in investing in housing in the right places. But we also have the climate goals. Flood resilience are important. We want to reduce the pressure on our farms and forests. There's a public health benefit to having more housing units in walkable communities. It helps our transit system, economic growth in all parts of the state, and maximize the impact of the municipal, state, and federal investments in those places. So sorry, that was a lot, but and I'm probably missing a few things.
no, this is wholesome. This is great.
And it really, when I think about this, if we move forward in this approach and we have these consistent land use plans statewide, it really just can serve as the foundation for so much public policy and investment decisions that will ensure consistency across the state. So that if you're looking at a planned growth area in one part of the state, you know that it's the same thought process as a planned growth area somewhere else. So you can look at some consistency in statewide policy in a way that we wouldn't have had previously.
So we have some consistency in agreements already in place, but what is different here is that we now will have a map
We'll have a map.
to be able to commit to consistency in those specific areas. And that we have not had.
Mhm.
So we've had, I would say, general consistency in some of the planning and values and goals, but not a map to say, okay, this is where we're doing X, Y, and Z, and this is where we're doing A, B, C.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Just an observation, and it may be something that you cover more, is I look at this long list of goals, and nowhere in it do I see a goal of allowing development where people want it. Where property owners, where stakeholders want it. It's what everybody else wants.
Well, yeah, and I think that is the role of planning, is listening, right? And actually, I was just going to go there because this isn't all about state policy. This is, I think, one of the things that was definitely front of our minds is more of a bottoms-up approach. Like this is more community, municipally based, coming up through the RPC to communicate to the state where locally the community wants things. So, and I hear there's a tension with private, personal property rights at the same time. But that's what, kind of land use regulation is it is impacting property rights.
I'm just struck by the silence to those issues in this list of goals.
Well, and I think it's just kind of
very striking.
I apologize for that. I think it's because we're so close. We're so close to that forest all the time that is the work of planning, is listening to the community to get what they want.
And some communities with zoning, some not. But I mean, we also have to recognize that some of the trade-offs, Randy, that we're going to be making this session, as we've grappled with before. These are thorny issues, but we're going to significantly green light certain areas, and we're going to red light and or yellow light a bunch of other areas, and for us to achieve all the things that we want to achieve.
Yeah, and that second bullet is really trying to get clarity about where is there community consensus on what we do and don't want things to happen, for better or worse. Yeah, so,
Okay. But the community consensus in the past has been, we don't want growth. And so,
Someplace.
any place but where I have to see it. So, how do we change that community attitude? We're here because some of us got here and liked it so much, we rolled up the drawbridge.
Yeah.
And now we're all still here, but we're not working. And there's no place for younger folks to move in. And we're hurting. We don't have the people we need to function.
I think when we talk about this, we're thinking that the housing targets is going to kind of be an objective number, because every region is supposed to get a target, and then we're supposed to work with our municipalities to say, okay, you know, what's your share, divvy it up within our region. And so that is going to kind of have a quantitative objective of like, do we have enough space to accommodate those units? You know, is it,
Right.
if they have zoning, is it zoned properly? Is it planned for? Do we have the infrastructure for it?
I'm just smiling because I was on a Central Vermont Regional Planning 35 years ago, doing the same thing. This is your housing quota in your town. And this one was more like lower income.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're still struggling to get out of that. And it's gonna take a real push. Like, we're gonna close hospitals because they can't get staff.
And I think when you talk about your experience of 35 years ago, that's when I started my career in planning, and it was all about protection, because we were looking at, you know, in my region, our counties had 20% growth rates in a county, and now we're down to 2% or under. So we still have, you know, we're trying to undo that mindset of protectionism that came from a real place of concern about what was happening in Vermont. And trying to undo that is part of the education about the work that we're trying to do here, about the proposal from the Natural Resources Board. And really, if we talk about well-planned growth and well-planned housing, it's different than just a free-for-all that I think people are scared of. And, you know, I understand that fear. So it's a lot about education and outreach and doing that at the planning level rather than trying to do that at the permitting level.
Right, and so you say that DHCD is going to be providing the housing targets sometime soon?
This spring, yeah.
In time for us to include in the bill?
No, well, you, in S100, you included a requirement that they do that.
Right,
Every time they do the housing needs assessment.
Right.
You can talk with the commissioner about the time, but my sense is it's kind of near the end of the session, like April, May, that they're planning to come out with that number.
Right.
So.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and I do think Catherine's point is really good, right? Like, you know, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Vermont, we had a high growth rate that we had a reaction to. We did regulation, Act 250 came in, a lot of municipalities started zoning. And now that growth rate is down so low, now we're trying to like, okay, maybe we went too far. So we're trying to find the Goldilocks zone here, right? Like that was too little incentives and regulation, and now we're too much. Where's the spot in the middle? And I think that's where we're trying to get to.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. So here's
Here's what we came up with.
here's a list of 9 area types that we came up with. And a lot of these are already in the various regional plans. So again, it doesn't, you know, it's not dramatic change. This is, and for some of it's some relabeling of the same kinds of areas, but, and I want to be sensitive to time.
You have plenty of time.
I think you have till 11, don't you?
10:45.
10:40.
Okay.
So downtown village centers, I mean, they are what we have been traditionally talking about, right? Where we have the designation, the tax credits. So nothing really new there.
What would be new? What would be new is if the designation reform proposal that you'll hear about moves forward, the regional plan maps could serve as the actual designation point for the now downtown and village designation program. And so what that would do would be make that more consistent, streamlined, happen all at once across the region, and unlock that benefit statewide to all communities, regardless of whether that community has the opportunity, capability, or interest of getting that, going through the designation program. So it would be increasing that opportunity to access tax credits and other benefits statewide through this process. So it would be a simpler approach.
I guess we keep talking about our plan is vibrant downtown surrounded. Well, during COVID, my mental health exercise was I would occasionally get out and drive. I didn't get south, but I did a whole lot of here and north and west. And I would say an awful lot of our downtown centers are anything but vibrant.
Yes.
The houses, people can't afford to paint their houses. There's, tarps on the roof and Tyvek on the outside with no siding. And I hope when we're doing this, we talk about the economic, before we could drive, those towns were economic centers, and they aren't anymore. I mean, we're having trouble getting and keeping Montpelier, I'm not going to say afloat, but it's not the vibrant community and that it was 30 years ago. And just one of that is the recent flood, but there's a lot of social change going on, and I think we need to make sure that everything, we can plan, but if everything else isn't there to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why, thanks, Catherine, for bringing it up. Yeah, sorry. In the big picture, I think we'd like to do a better job of tying all these studies together for you in one kind of comprehensive package, but we'll try to introduce the pieces that are from the designation study or the Act 250 study as we go along. And I do think, updating the designation program is coming in, trying to update that, make it easier for property owners to access those tax credits.
Yeah.
That's obviously a critical state investment in those properties, in those older, historic properties.
But I think some of our small village centers that were vibrant in a non-car transportation world, I think we are seeing natural migration for some of the commerce and centers a little more regionally. And a lot of, we see it with the loss of our general stores in some of these small towns. I mean, there is going to be a regionalization to some of this, which is a natural occurrence given our transportation patterns and our job patterns, because fewer and fewer jobs are based in the village center, if any, except for maybe our schools and our municipal staff. I mean, so I think this gives towns opportunities to rethink what they want in their village centers and what's realistic. And Wendy.
Well, just a couple of things. So regarding the village centers, there was a statistic put out actually last week about how there are more people moving into Vermont than there are moving out of Vermont.
Right.
And a lot of those folks want walkable small communities. So I wouldn't give up on the village centers, especially the smaller ones.
Mm-hmm.
And just driving around the state with someone who knows about how they used to be, the designation programs have been really effective.
Yeah.
So hopefully
Absolutely.
you're looking at what has worked well.
That's right.
And then just so I know our time is short and you don't need to answer all of this, but some things I'm interested in your report, the 5-5 requirement of Act 250 has puzzled and me, I honestly don't see the value of it, except for reducing the amount of developers as a company. So I was happy to see that you mentioned it, but I would just like at some point to have more of a conversation about that.
We will naturally with
Okay,
also with
because
NRB.
only that study doesn't reference it. I think this study is the only one of the three
Is
that
this-
I've seen that
I thought
references
the NRB addressed the 5x5?
Maybe it does, but I don't remember, and because I've been looking for it, so.
So when it
so-
comes up here, let's.
Yeah, I just really
Yeah.
want to
Okay.
talk about that at some point, and then also tracking and counting new housing is so, so important.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
not getting done very well, in my opinion. The Two Rivers, the regional commission near you folks.
Two Rivers Ottauquechee.
Yeah, there's actually a private organization that is tracking and doing a good job of tracking. And what they have to do is go to each municipality and get the numbers. And they've chosen a subset of the municipalities. And it's just so, so important that we have information, especially if we're gonna set goals. And you folks are the ones who I would look to
And we
be our experts on that.
And we
Please.
mentioned this last year, and we would love help to somehow make the work of our listers with the tax department be a source of that data. There's already reporting, it's already.
Right, it's already
collection.
happening.
Right.
It's just a question.
It's about how can we get that data in a way,
Right.
it's,
Well, it's a problem with the program is what I understand, is
Yes.
that there's a field, a really important field that's not
Right.
a numeric field. It's a coding problem. And you would think that could be fixed.
Well, we could also fix, yeah,
But
at the rental
it hasn't
register, we
been.
can also fix that.
Yeah, I think we have both asked the tax department and people, to please don't just get the fact that there's a building, right? We get the
Yes.
911 reporting, but get the number of units attached to it. Yeah.
Right, it's an alpha field.
Yeah, and
That's
that's,
the problem on
I'm afraid that's gonna take some legislative directive to fix that, because you're right,
Yeah.
otherwise we're putting in a lot of sweat equity.
and we're doing the calls out to every town.
So
Yeah.
VHFA has some ideas on this and we're going to be looking at the rental registry again in the housing bill. So
Great.
we have all of these. tracked.
Okay, number 2 is the planned growth area, so that's kind of the larger area around those centers, right? The residential neighborhoods, the designation program calls this the neighborhood area.
The planned growth.
Yeah, and so we're being a little purposeful in that, right? Like it's not, because neighborhood kind of conveys a sense of static. It's like this is the neighborhood and this is gonna stay this way. So we kind
It
of,
doesn't convey static to me.
not necessarily,
No,
but
yeah, it's
but-
like character of the neighborhood. This is,
yeah, that's.
we've never cut down a tree, so we are never cutting down another tree.
Yes. And so we're kind of purposefully using a little different term here. We're gonna accommodate those numbers in the housing targets. This is the residential area around the center. Not that it's always perfect like that, but you get the idea. So this is kind of the densest areas. This is the area that also ties into what the NRB is calling the tier 1A. And they would achieve tier 1A status of the NRB if they have good bylaws and things in place, similar to the review that happens for the neighborhood development area now.
And then that would get a green light on Act 250.
Yeah. And-
Yeah, I think something for us in terms of immediate growth would be to consider immediately to maybe then just until we have all this work done, is to extend that an X% as a swath around a village center. And we could just do that and see how that would work
Yeah.
until a lot of this other stuff is adopted.
And that
But
kind of-
enable like this year, like 1/8 of a mile around.
The
the village
neighborhood
center.
development area already has that idea of a quarter mile around the
Yeah, a
village. and
quarter
half
mile around the village.
downtown.
Would be just such a great incentive for stuff.
Yeah, and then, recognizing, so the village areas, I think we were thinking of the areas where maybe they haven't really updated their zoning, but it's around a village center, but they still can get, investment in infrastructure and things like that happen here. Is there more you want to say about that?
Those are like those little areas that I don't want us to forget about. when I was-
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yes,
They're the areas that are part of the village that are outside of the
yes,
designation.
yes. The
But
charming
But
little
not to
areas.
the scale of like the regional growth,
Right.
plant growth areas.
But just don't take a stylus and draw a circle,
Right.
because topography doesn't always work that way. You
Yeah.
might have to go a half a mile here because there's mountains on all the other sides.
Yeah, in the long
So-
term, that would be the
Yes.
goal. Understanding that in the short term, the
You could have an
longer approach
exemption
might
for a
be.
short bit until all of this is put in place.
And we're still holding with the 5-5.
Well, I mean, personally, so, and this is not something we talk a lot about, I don't see the purpose of the, the 10-5-5 restriction. It's just, that if the purpose was to, drive medium-sized developers out of business, we've already accomplished that mission. So what's our new mission? Is probably not to do that. We need that part of the industry to come back. So I don't understand the purpose of 10-5-5 anymore.
And you need to give them the ability to do some economies of scale.
Right.
And right now, part of the problem is if we say, fine, you can build here, it still costs $350,000 and the average Vermonter can afford $250,000. And we're not gonna, we've got to get some way to get that cost differential.
And I think one missing piece, as we're rolling out the Home Act is that, the state now has duplex zoning across the
Right.
state, but when you go to Act 250, if you build a duplex, it counts as two. So that definition of 2 = 1 statewide at the local level is not carried.
So we need to
forward.
think that.
I
Yeah,
that would be a
Right, and that
great
makes
idea.
sense, right, and we were also thinking a duplex would be adding on one to an existing
Mhm.
unit too. So I do think that was still, that's a good thing to do, but yes, we need to fix that.
Just looking at this segment, the last paragraph, I'm just trying to understand and define it. Are you simply saying that you need larger village areas?
Yeah, we're saying there's more to the village than that commercial core.
Yes.
And we have a sample map to show you what
Yeah.
this might look like coming up.
And in all fairness, the villages themselves are pretty small, most of them. I mean, in terms of what's in the village limits.
Yeah, and there's a full spectrum, of things. So I think we were just trying to say like we want some adaptable geography around those designated village centers.
Because the designation is really the point of those primarily was the tax credit eligibility. And so they're tightly focused, and we don't want to lose that for the tax credit purposes. But we have to recognize the larger area because that's what's important to build the vibrancy.
Well, it's where it's appropriate to build housing.
For housing that's
So
support.
And are you then later on in the presentation going to define how you make that change and how that occurs? And under what circumstances and what criteria?
This is about as deep as we're going on this right now, but yeah, it's through the updating of the regional planning maps, with our municipalities and then some review by the
Or
state.
would there be in effect some sort of a statewide set of criteria
Yeah.
that would
Yes.
drive how
Consistent,
this happens?
consistent
Yeah.
Who
criteria.
would do that?
I think, at the end of this, yeah, we'll talk about that implementation, but I think we were thinking that, we're willing to work on that criteria as the RPCs, propose it. I'm not sure, I don't think we got into who exactly owns that. Was it the Department of Housing and Community Development, is it ACCs, is it the legislature? We didn't get into that level of detail. Yeah.
And
But
then
you're
there's
absolutely
changing
right.
community attitudes. Because these people that haven't wanted growth are still there.
Yeah, and it's funny though, if you read their plans, they all talk about this stuff, but what's actually in the regulations and things don't follow, right? So,
They aren't all consistent either.
no, for sure not. Okay, get back to these areas. We came up, this one is kind of the in-between area, like we knew there was gonna be some areas in town where they hadn't necessarily updated their zoning, so they weren't ready for like, the tier 1 stuff in the NRB study, but they could be. They might have some of the infrastructure in place, but they need to work on their zoning. So, and this also, the other thing we were thinking about here was there may be some areas adjacent to the planned growth or village areas, that the municipalities just starting to think about growing into, particularly for like flood relief areas, like, and so this was truly a transition area. It may not stay as a transition area. It may go from transition initially, if they do some work on the bylaws or whatever, it may move up to a planned growth area or a village area. But we thought there may be some circumstances where having this kind of area was important. with you on that.
This, I think this is worth conversation, because to me, this is an area that is, I mean, you're saying it this is an area that somebody wants to change.
Yeah, this is a
This
good
is
sprawl repair
Like,
area.
or like a sprawl.
Yeah,
Area.
so, yeah, there may be good chunks of
So this
Chittenden
is
County
gonna
that
be
might
very
be.
controversial, but I appreciate you bringing it up,
Yeah.
because it does
We
need to
have
be
to
talked
discuss it.
about.
Yeah,
Yeah, but this is really important, and
absolutely.
And most of the time, those areas are located in places where growth makes sense.
right.
The goal here would be to, how can we do that growth in a more dense fashion that supports our downtowns and villages and meets our housing needs?
And generally, the ones I've seen anyway, you would add housing to,
Probably, yeah.
strip commercial.
Well, in
Which is-
many cases, strip commercial means nobody wants to live here.
Okay, in other
And that's a
places,
problem.
strip commercial is in a beautiful location,
Yes.
and when you redeveloped, it could be wonderful, and that actually dovetails with where our economy is, because where our commercial buildings are less valuable and our residential buildings are more valuable. So if you can make that transition, we talked about that last year, about transitioning commercial to residential.
Yeah,
And that's where this is, I believe, right?
Yeah, and I think it kind of came from conversations about, some of those strip or sprawl zones, but also some notion there might be some greenfield area where the town is trying to evolve into. And I think, it's also, we don't talk specifically about getting away from that strict Euclidean zoning, you can only have commercial uses here. We're kind of, I think the profession is evolving to a little bit more, let's do what the market is asking for here. If the market's asking for residential, okay, why not allow residential here too?
But do it intentionally
Yeah.
and not,
That's right.
well, the most successful centers are ones where you have both.
Yeah, the whole mix of
You
uses.
have
are like-
housing above commercial, or you
Right.
have housing right behind it or very close to it, all walkable, to go back to
Right.
walkable.
So we have a
communities.
couple more that are like where development actually is. This resource-based recreation area, the easiest thing to think about is ski areas. There's already quite a bit of development there, but they're not necessarily, an area where we're trying to encourage a lot more growth, or it's certainly not a historic village center. But they're out there, so we're gonna recognize those. And then enterprise are those kind of business parks and things, industrial parks that aren't really connected to the fabric of the community. They're down the road half a mile or something. So I thought we should identify those also.
Waterbury's industrial park is right downtown.
Right, which is great.
And
That
it's
is part of
very
the,
integrated into the community.
Like Rutland's.
And
I mean,
so-
Rutland's best one
And-
is integrated in its downtown like Waterbury, and the one actually that was built arbitrarily on this farm on the south side has been abandoned pretty much,
Yeah.
except for the hockey rink.
Yeah, but there are still some of those remote ones. So that's for this. The ones that are part of the fabric, they should
Yeah.
just be part of the planned growth area or
Yeah.
village area.
Exactly.
So, and then, we start to get a little bit more rural now. We kind of debated whether to keep hamlets, so those kind of like little crossroad, locations where there might be a few homes, or maybe there's a church or something. So we wanted to at least be able to identify those. They may just be so small, they're points. And then we get into 3 rural categories. This first one is more like rural residential. We call it rural general. And I always feel like I should go to the end and come back. But ag forestry has a second layer of rural. And then finally the conservation area, which we're thinking is more similar to what the NRB is talking about as tier 3.
Right.
And so, when the NRB is talking about tier 2, is all those categories in the middle that we talked about, or actually 50 would probably stay as is. And here we're just kind of noting, that this is tied in also to, the 30 by 30, 50 by 50 law, and the forestry law that got passed a few years ago. So, yeah. Noting that, and then here Catherine was brave
Here's a
enough
sample.
to put a map out there.
And what, the goal of showing you this is to get an idea of scale. So these lines are not definite, so, don't look at St. Albans and say, okay, that's where the lines would be drawn.
But very
But
graph,
it's to give you an idea of scale of what these areas might be. So if you look, you'll see the darkest red areas would be the core areas that we talked about. And then the pink is those planned growth areas or the village areas. And then the brownish orange is the transition areas that exist in our region. And then the darkest green is conservation. And in our region, that is the steepest slopes, the highest elevations, the state or privately conserved lands, state, federal, and privately conserved lands, wetlands, those things that can't be developed anyway. And then the light yellow is the rural and the lighter green is the rural ag. So it just wanted to give you an idea of the scale of these areas that we're talking about. So when you're thinking about this could change obviously, but this is an order of magnitude idea of what these maps might look like.
No, it's very helpful.
It's very helpful,
And
yeah.
so when we're talking about green lighting through natural resources or changes through Act 250, perhaps this gives you an idea of the scale of the land area that we might be talking about. So it's not enormous, but it's meaningful.
Right. Well, and
yeah, and I think all the regions have not done this mapping.
And this isn't final, again, I must say,
Yeah,
just to give you an idea of what the scale might look like. Yeah.
And when we've talked about going through this mapping process, it was like, well, if the legislature asks us to do this, it's gonna be the bottoms up conversation we have with our towns. Let's kind of work on this. So it'll take a little while to get the final maps.
do you have a sort of a goal in terms of timeframe
We do.
on the towns?
Yeah, we have a
Yeah,
deal.
Because
I'll talk about that,
I mean, otherwise it's gonna take years.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna have to make some sort of temporary exemptions, it strikes me, for us to get going on this. Sort of safe guesses as to what good expansions would be. But we're gonna need a time frame on this.
Yeah, and with this map here, the planned growth areas and the village areas, those areas that are outside of the core, we based the boundaries on a mapping exercise that all the regional commissions did about 7 or 8 years ago, mapping walkable centers. And so those lines were based on some sort of process where we all had standards that we used and we applied to all of our communities. So we have a starting point to build from. where the point of that is that we're not starting from scratch here.
Senator, you want to dig any deeper on trying to find your house?
Just walking.
Again, this is just an example.
No, but it's
No, and
really
it's-
helpful to
But
have
I
an
think it's
example.
super helpful
Yeah.
to see and appreciate. That took a lot of answer.
But I also think it's not that different than,
It's not that different.
Then your
I'm
current-
saying that.
yeah, so, we're only talking about an evolution of the mapping we've already done with our municipalities, not a dramatic, go left instead of go right? So I don't know if that's any consolation. And, you're kind of asking, I think this gives you some sense of like
Right.
the percent of the land area. I mean, we're talking, less than, way less than
Modest but
10%.
appropriate. So
Yeah.
the timeframe.
Okay,
Question.
let's jump ahead
All
to
right,
that.
all right, let me skip to the bottom here. So this implementation timeline, I should have numbered these slides, would have been a lot more helpful, but the next to last slide, we threw in a little table at the end of our report to talk about that. And you'll see here, the RPC is refining the land use criteria. We were kind of saying, we'll do that in 6 months. So if you get this done, in the legislation, come July 1, we'll get that done by 12/31. The designation program, NRB, and probably we need some help from A&R, giving them a year. They were asking, well, when we were talking to them, they were saying, 12 to 24 months. We thought we'd start with 12. And so that's what's here. They're going to ask for more time, I expect. And then,
Sorry, I missed the who's the they.
oh, sorry. on the third row there, updated state designation guidance, DHCD. Right, so they're asking for, 12 to 24 months, I can't remember exactly, to do that work.
Really?
And then A and
Gosh,
R,
that's a long time.
I'm banking on the 12.
yeah. If you can negotiate something faster, we're supportive. Same thing with the NRB, we're assuming that after legislation is changed, there'll be some rulemaking around the NRB, and that might take 12 months. And then what happens in that tier 3, which, at this point, we're thinking that, the dark green areas that Catherine just showed, that we would work with A&R to map those in our maps. And we're thinking that would also take some time for
Right.
A&R to kind of like help us get pinned down on exactly what that is.
And so if you look at the things we're in control of, the Regional Planning Commission, it's like, because we can control the adoption of our regional plans. Realistically, if we think that we can have by the end of the calendar year, the standards in place, and then within, 18 to 24 months after that, all of our regional plans updated.
And that's all the towns weighing in.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you would hope to have the towns weigh in, the regional mapping done by December of 25 or 26?
26.
We said June 26 or June 27. So the 27 was a little bit of a hedge. I think I was being nice to a couple of my peers. We're like, it's going to take a little bit longer, but.
Yeah, when do you have?
Yeah, well, just a quick thing, or it won't be a quick discussion, but just something that needs to be part of this if you want it. You in the report, you talk about state investment being influenced by these designations and by the areas. That's a big conversation too. So that,
Again,
I don't see that on the timeline.
oh,
And,
yeah.
and if you are going to use it for that, I think the folks who are involved in state investment need to be involved in the designation so that it doesn't come as a surprise to them later on. And they might have other conditions, like, I'm just thinking about wastewater facilities. I mean, right now there is a process to prioritize who gets them and who doesn't. And so there's also federal rules. So you just, that's
And there's probably some
important.
statutory changes, because a lot of programs kind of piggyback on the designation process.
Yes.
And so, yes, you're right. Those programs need to be updated, whether it's in statute or rule or their guidance to correspond to a different geography
Right.
than just a designation.
Right, so they at least need a heads up that this is happening.
Yeah. No, that was a lot of their review of like, they were kind of digesting that a lot
Okay,
from A&R and V-Trans in particular.
good.
So we will have you back in, we're at our break time.
Yeah.
We will have you back in, and perhaps when the NRB is reporting, it would be great to have you in sync working with them. But we were so grateful for this work, and it's again, so glad, I mean, the Home Act, to put this into play is really such an important piece of our work into the future. So thank you for getting it done
Thank you.
on time.
We view this honestly as helping accomplish a lot of state goals and frankly our
Huge.
regional plan goals, so.
As important in some ways as the Act 250 updating, this work of figuring out where is just critically important for us to grow together and everyone be at least on board with that. So that this is terrific. More to follow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All of us will read the report now that it's up on our website. And thank you. I think we'll go off live and reconvene.